recording.
Yeah. So we are introducing you to part 2 of this podcast, final showdown between left-hand path and right-hand path. Welcome, Jan Ferguson. Please don't kill me during this.
Yeah, likewise, man. I'm pretty sure you're better at the baneful magic.
I tend to do it long term. Like, I don't know how to do it quickly, but long term I am capable of doing it.
I don't doubt it one bit.
Yeah. So technically, we stopped talking about your shamanic experiences. So can you talk about more what it means to be a shaman and how you became a shaman and what are the principles?
Yeah. So I think that I explained mostly in part 1 how this he was a actual shaman, in the sense of that really the only people in the world who can truly say they're shamans are the Siberian shamans, the original shamans. Everyone else are some kind of medicine man or some other kind of thing, although, you know, shaman tends to mean any kind of like indigenous pre I don't know, modern civilization kind of like magical system that tends to be aligned with nature, is kind of, I guess, how I would describe it as an overarching term. However, literally, Blackfoot was literally in a Siberian shamanic line that he said went back into the mists of time. And one of the main things that he practiced, and I didn't, I did a little bit of it, and he was starting to teach me about it, but for him, he really believed that the most potent magic was always involved art. And so he would make totem poles, was one of the main things he would do. Or he would make, and it may even still be around this house someplace, because it was in this house many years ago that he visited. But he made a bear totem for the house to protect the house. So he was an excellent wood carver, and he carved a totem of a brown bear in order to invoke the brown bear spirit to protect this house and this property. And so he also had been taught certain mysteries by the Inuit people. So they're often called Eskimos, but they don't like that term, but just so people know who I'm talking about. So those are the native people who live up in northwestern Alaska, right? Who came over across the Bering Strait, so they say. So he was half Inuit or Eskimo and half Siberian. And so very far east along the coast, Siberian. So, you know, north of China, I guess, is where that is, and kind of like north and east of Mongolian. It seems to me that there's some common stream between the Mongolian shamans and the Siberian shamans. There's a bit of crossover in some of that Tibetan plateau kind of stream of consciousness. So what does it mean to be a shaman? The way he explained it to me was that you're basically a protector of nature, like kind of almost first and foremost. And so protection of wild spaces is key. Trying to eat a diet, and we discussed this very briefly when we talked a while ago, the importance of having a pure diet. He talked about that quite a bit. He ate meat, and he said eating meat was fine, but he said you have to be really careful with meat, especially because so much of the way in which meat is raised, and also things that may be added to meat when it goes through the slaughterhouse, this sort of thing, can be dangerous. So he was really a believer in always having like pure organic foods, farms, food that comes directly from like organic farms or that's wild crafted. And so protection of nature was one of the main things that he said was the most important. He, as we mentioned in part 1, he said that one of the primary jobs of shamans was to root out and destroy pedophilia, because it was what was anchoring like extremely dark forces onto the earth. And I mean, I would say that they were the tyrannical dark left-hand path forces more so. And it makes sense, right? Because the very act itself is extreme domination, and there's no consent possible because it's a child. So he basically said the modern control systems of modern controlled civilization comes from pacts that were made with very powerful lower realm forces in the Near East, in the temples, 4,000 something odd years ago. This is kind of, when you see that transition, interestingly enough, from the way the Yuga system works is, let me see if I can find a file that so the visual is quite nice. The way the Yuga system works is that it starts with like, it never always starts or ends because it's cyclical and infinite, but it has, like, I'll just begin with, it has a golden age. And so the last time the earth was in a golden age was during the age of Atlantis, and worldwide they talk about a golden age and a high-tech civilization. And we alluded to it in part 1 about how the mistake they made was that they got involved with, let's see, is this the one I want? No, that is not the image I want. They got they used technology, as you said, to try and force a connection to God, and that was actually what began to start the downfall of that civilization. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find this image, and so rather than split my attention, I'll just continue to talk to you. But so you start at the top, and this would have been like in the age of Virgo, actually, in the great year astrologically, and because as you move astrologically, it goes backwards through the signs. When it went into the cusp of Virgo Leo, that is approximately when the beginning of the fall of Atlantis happened, the first great disaster there. There was maybe another 1,000 years from the first great disaster, which seems to be somehow technological. And then there was a descent into the Silver Age. And the Silver Age is still extremely spiritualized, not very materialistic. And the way that I have learned it, this may not be accurate. Things have made me wonder about this now, but that, things are much more harmonious, much less warfare. Then it descends further still into the Bronze Age. And so the final fall of Atlantis would have happened early in the Silver Age. And then there would have been like the diaspora to pre-dynastic Egypt. The rise of the Sumerians happens probably late Silver Age. And then the Dwarpa Yuga, and so it goes, Sat Yuga is the Golden Age, Treta Yuga is the Silver Age, Dwarpa Yuga is the Bronze Age, and then there's a descending Kali Yuga, and then an ascending Kali Yuga. And each of these yugas lasts, and then it goes upward into the ascending Dwarpa Yuga, then ascending Treta Yuga, then ascending Sat Yuga, and then there's descending Sat Yuga. And then it comes down into descending Treta Yuga, descending Dwarpa Yuga, and then it repeats in a circle. And so he said that essentially right before the Kali Yuga began was when this demonic pact was made, where in order to anchor this really totalitarian stream of left-hand path, which is, I would say, all of history that hasn't been scrubbed, was created in part by the pedophilic rituals that were coming out of the Near Eastern temples. This is what he told me. And he said that the stopping and destroying that was the number one thing shamans have to do, that he put basically precisely on the same tier as protecting the last of the truly wild spaces. And so then you asked me another question about it. Like you said, what are some of the practices? Was that the other part of the question you asked? So he would invoke various different animal spirits through art. Primarily, the main thing he did was wood carving, but he also said any kind of painting that captures that art, that you can do things like you can invoke the bear for protection, or you could invoke like a caribou spirit in order to bring more abundance and more familial connection and more in particular, making sure that everyone is fed. And you could invoke the wolf if, like, there was something that was now diseased that needed to be taken out. And how you would do this is that you would, often through the use of psychedelics or other plant medicine, you would visualize and really connect with the energy of that animal, and then you would journey within your own mind, connecting with that animal, perhaps becoming a wolf in a dream, something like this, where you would fully embody internally, an internal experience, this wolf energy or whatever it is that you're working with. And then you would then, when you came back to your body, you would then bring it into this world via some artistic practice, such as doing a wolf carving or doing a painting of a wolf, something like this. And he explained to me that art was one of the best ways to do magic because it operates in the subconscious of both the individual doing the art, but then anyone who views the art it bypasses the logical mind and goes directly into the subconscious, directly into the intuitive, therefore helping to bring into this world the actual energies of the wolf spirit. And so I didn't get to train with him for as long as I wanted. It was only a few months. And so he did something like Reiki, but he could draw upon the energy of sort of like living objects around him, like his general space around him. He could draw the energy of it. And he would never do so much that he would wilt something, but he could draw from plants nearby or any natural sources nearby and do healing with that. And I started to learn that, but I shortly thereafter started to learn Reiki, and I found that if I wanted to do healing, I preferred to do Reiki, because if there isn't sufficient natural life energy around you to do that kind of healing, you draw upon your own, which we discussed in part 1, and that can drain you. And it's also risky to where you can sometimes pull a disease into you if you're not careful. Rather than pushing it out or removing it from them, it's easy, especially with your receptive hand, the left hand, interestingly, or whatever your non-dominant hand is, you could receive through you diseases that you're trying to get rid of. So that was one of the risks, and it required real concentration to do. So that isn't something that I particularly was interested in practicing once I learned Reiki healing. And I would say that my shamanic practices over the past several years have been mostly in prophetic dream form. I haven't done a lot of direct interaction with the animal spirits, although this conversation is making me feel like it must be bubbling up in my subconscious and is something that I should turn back to. Let's see, trying to think what else he would have said. He wasn't just, oh, go ahead.
Did you ever do the drumming? Like
the what?
Drumming? Did you ever drumming with shamanic drum? Like
I have never been particularly good with music, and so I didn't do drumming, but I would I find drum circles to be fantastic if people have talent for entering into meditative states to where you can easily like operate in the astral realm. I'm not particularly good at that. Interestingly enough, my sister is kind of a bee shaman, really, and she's much, much deeper in the shamanic stream than I am. I'm much more have moved into sort of theurgic magic and I don't know, Vedic astrology and sort of certain Eastern meditations. I've moved. I haven't like abandoned shamanism, but it hasn't been like my primary focus in a long time. But my sister can do things like she can have empty beehives and she can drum on her drum, and a wild hive will come and will swirl right down into her hive. She can just bring a wild hive of bees, summon them basically at will. I've seen her do it a number of times, and she lives with them. She listens to them. She casts her mind into them, and she says that she can communicate with them directly, and she's super, super deep on specifically bee shamanism, and she's actually spoken in a number of different countries about it, and she went and picked up some interesting streams to do with Artemis out of Turkey when she was there giving a speech. So she knows a lot more about the shamanic current than I do. That's not my specialty. Really, Vedic astrology at this point is like probably the thing that I feel that I'm have the greatest talent in.
So the reason why I asked you about shamanism is selfish. There is Slavic god. His name is Veles or Volos, which it has 5 fucking translations. You know those old names. One translation is Big Tree. One translation is the Great One. One translation is the Great Ox, and one translation is him. He transforms into a dragon, so he is also known as the Great Dragon of the Earth.
Wow.
And so when he appears to me, he always appears as a shamanic figure with the drum, and he's heavily associated with the shamanism, but also with the underworld. So I wanted to ask about this duet to him, because I don't know anybody who can like teach me how to use the drum. Because the thing with shamans is like there is a lot of there is a lot of fake motherfuckers, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very hard. I mean, it was pure, I mean, it was divine luck or whatever it was meant to be that I ran across him. I'm almost certain that I sought him out actually 2 years ago. There was another rainbow gathering. That was the only way I knew to get a hold of him because, he wasn't doing internet or anything like that. You know what I mean? He was just walking in a completely different. I mean, he hitchhiked over the place. He was down in Australia and like worked with the Aboriginal shamans down there, and they did some kind of ritual at Ayers Rock. And he came back with this giant blue. What is that stone called? I'm trying to think what that stone is they have down in Australia. An opal. He came with this giant blue medicine opal, and he actually had me trade it when I was at that rainbow gathering with him. But I went to one a couple of years ago and sought him out, and I couldn't find him. And a couple of I was finally able to find some older person. He was like, I don't know. He always used to come, and I haven't seen him, and so I think he might have died. He smoked a lot of cigarettes, so he would always roll his own, and he must have smoked, I don't know, 15 or 20 a day. So who knows? And he kind of lived a rough life. He wasn't trying to, settle down anywhere. He'd walked the earth and had been to God only knows how many countries. He just was constantly moved by intuition and would move all over the earth. And he also told me there's secret gatherings of shamans, Native American shamans that are called the Turtle Island Gathering. But you talked about this earlier in part 1 about how secretive these people are, and they're incredibly, incredibly, incredibly secretive. And the reason for that is they've been getting killed for 4,000 something years, by the totalitarian left-hand pathers who have been utterly dominant. And so they're scared.
Us too, real.
What's that?
They kill left-hand pathers who disagree with them.
Sure. I don't disagree. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. Although Christians have killed both of us is another way of looking at it.
They were just a bright side of the totalitarian system we talk about. Because just look at certain statues in the Vatican and everything will be clear to you what they are actually doing and practicing down there. But the thing is about Reiki, kind of, you told me that it cannot be practiced without initiation. Can you go a little bit more into detail?
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff can be found on the web nowadays, so I don't feel as bad talking about it. But you have to do certain techniques where there's a what's called the microcosmic orbit meditation. Do you know this? Well, okay, so there's 2 main gaps to an energetic circuit that you have that's called the governing channel and what is the other name? There's 2 different channels, one of them that runs in the front of the body and one of them runs in the back, and it basically goes from the top of the head down to the root chakra and then the other side. It's the governing channel, and God, why can I not remember this? I never have to remember the name because I just do it. But there's 2 channels basically in your body, one that goes up the back and one that goes down the front. And you have to close this circuit, and you do so by touching your tongue to the roof of your mouth, which is actually by far the hardest thing about doing a Reiki initiation. And then you have to clench your pelvic floor, or the Hui Yin point is what they call it. And you have to clench these 2 in order to create a closed circuit. And then there's certain things that I can't say just because it's really meant to be for the mystery, but you have to do a certain kind of breathing technique that involves one of the 6 Reiki symbols, which are a composite of Japanese kanji and it seems certain Tibetan pictographic symbols, and you have to hold them in, and then you do a sacred breath onto the person's crown chakra to open it up. You use the mouth of God point on the back of the skull, and you bring the symbols down through their hands, through their crown chakra, and then you put it into the bottom of their skull through the mouth of God point on the back of the skull. And you then do this and you put symbols into their hands. And I mean, it won't work if people haven't had the flame or the torch passed to them. So I don't believe in all these like online initiations. Like, maybe you can do it astrally. I'm open to that. It can be done, but I think the vast majority of people who are doing these online things are just charlatans, just trying to take people's money. And so I don't put a lot of stock in that. I believe that it has to really be directly passed. What?
Yeah, because it's serious alchemical process. I understand what you are talking about.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally carving of runes into the astral body.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. That's very similar to it. And you're also building up the energy of Reiki within you, holding the circuit, and then you blow that energy into them at several points. And plus you're guiding the symbols down from the celestial realms into the the practitioner's hands, crown chakra, through their third eye, and then putting it into what they call the mouth of God, which is this point at the back of the skull. And then you seal it all up when you're done with the process. But the hardest part is holding that circuit closed, because the energy is bubbling a lot. And also it's a very combination of, you're using both hemispheres of your brain. You're really using your rational mind, and you have to do it in a certain order. It is very formulaic. But then Reiki energy tends to push you into your right hemisphere and into a very intuitive state. And so it's very, very hard with all the energy moving through you to hold that frequency and also be, as you say, and this is well put, carving those runes into their astral body. That's exactly right. I haven't heard it described that way, but that's exactly right. So yeah, it's quite a process whenever you initiate someone. And I'm also dubious of people who crank out, do tons and tons and tons of initiations over a course of a weekend and just sort of force it through. I really believe that you need to really build rapport with your student, and you need to really connect with them on a very deep level. And if you're not doing that, the flame isn't as bright when you pass it. It's not as strong when you pass it. Everybody also has a relative level of skill based on their own personal connection to source. And so some people, even if you nail it, will be somewhat weak, and then other people will be incredibly strong, even if perhaps you make minor mistakes when you're doing the initiation. It seems to depend more on the individual almost than what the master's doing, because part of it is that you call in guides to assist you in the whole process. And some claim, oh, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes, like the guides take care of all of it for you. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the better you nail the initiation ritual, the more powerful the transference. But it is also how receptive is the student you're working with. How much talent, individual talent, do they have?
So technically, what you are telling me is that it is really complex science, which has a lot of interesting quirks to it. But what I want to ask you is, like, by what you told me, reversing those symbols will be extremely difficult. Like creating a black variant of it.
It's possible. I mean, probably the best way to do that would be to hold it up to a mirror and then copy what you see in the mirror, because especially there's the third Reiki symbol, the Han Shizai Shinen symbol, is insanely complicated. It has like 28 separate sort of brush strokes to it, because I always imagine when I'm doing it that I'm doing it in the old traditional Japanese calligraphy with a brush. I always see it as like white astral light brush when I'm creating the Reiki symbols, and before I put them into either a client that I'm just doing a healing session on, or if I'm, doing the much more hardcore work of an initiation, that the brush strokes, so like, one of them is incredibly common, and I can just show you, because again, you can find these all over the internet. But the Choku Rei symbol goes like this. If you want to wash my hands, it goes like this. So it starts on the left. So I guess you would want to start on the right if you're trying to do this. I mean, viewer beware. I have no idea what Dimitri's idea here would do. And Dimitri's has got giant balls of steel, and we'll just try whatever the fuck comes along to find the mysteries. But I say, use at your own risk Dimitri's plan here. But you would go like this. You come from the left and you come down, and then you do 3 circles where you cross the center line, you cross it again up at the top, 2 you cross the center line, and then 3 you cross the center line and to the middle. And so I guess you would, I'm not even going to do it because it feels, I'm not sure what would happen if I do it. But you would, I guess, start on the right and then do a triple circle in the other way. And so that one's one of the simplest symbols. But there's ones that look like a gigantic Japanese, what are those structures called? They're a pagoda. The kind of pagoda structure is what it looks a lot like. And it's quite complicated. And so reversing all those strokes would be quite fascinating. And then I wonder, would you turn it upside down? My intuition says probably turning it upside down is almost even more important than mirroring it left to right, although I think you would probably have to do that as well with the idea you have.
So like the only way for me is to like make this black Reiki is if I meet somebody like you who like is tolerant of what I am doing. Because if I ever talk about black Reiki publicly on some Reiki seminar, that's like that sentence. They will like that. So my notice here is like, but can you tell us how many symbols there actually are?
So there's 6 up through Reiki Master. There are 6 symbols, and again, you can find them on the internet without too much trouble. I feel comfortable with. I showed you Choku Rei because this is the most common, and that symbol can be used for a number of things. It can be used for increasing power, is the way it's generally used, but it also works to seal things and it also works to cleanse things. So I don't know what that would mean. I guess all of that would be reversed with what you're contemplating. So that would be something like maybe some vampiric draining of like a energy. So you'd maybe drain some kind of energy that was poisonous or bad. You would break something open rather than seal it. Maybe if someone needs to have a healing crisis, because I'm imagining this as being a violent healing. And I mean, there are myths and legends and also like popular fantasy lore, which I find to be some sort of fractal or some sort of metaphor for things that actually exist in this realm or another. There are things about violent, dark magic healing that exist in various lore. So I don't think it's impossible what you're thinking, but it would be maybe draining power rather than granting power. It would be breaking open rather than sealing. And it would be, I don't know, putrefying rather than cleansing. Not sure how that would be helpful, but maybe if you putrefied cancer cells, I mean, that's kind of what they do with chemotherapy. Right. So maybe if you're putrefying or defiling energy instead of healing, you could use that to destroy like a gangrenous limb and prevent the infection from going any further, something like that. So there's 6 of them, and then there's let me just sit with it for a second whether I can name them. Yeah, I can name them. You can find this online anyway, and it just doesn't have any power if you're not initiated, so it doesn't matter. So then the second one is called Seiheki, and this one is for mental and emotional support, and so it helps people to heal with emotional wounding. And so it helps them to have emotional releases of various kinds, and that's called Seiheki, and that's a bit more of a complex symbol, and you don't get that until you get second-degree Reiki. And then the third one is, I mentioned earlier, that by far the most complicated, and it's called Han Shizei Shonen, and it's got 27, 28 brush strokes, something like that, and it transmits Reiki over space, and I've discovered even time. I have sent Reiki back in time to myself when I was younger, and it definitely worked. And you can also use it to move energy and to encourage, like, for example, entities that have served their purpose for someone, that attach to someone. I'm not talking about a full-blown spirit, but you know how there's kind of like the animal level intelligence, or even a little bit lower than that, insect level of intelligence kind of entities that often are attached to people, you know, this kind of thing that I'm talking about. Just kind of like, they're not even demonic, they just tend to be like kind of parasitic, I don't know, even thought forms or astral forms of some sort. They're just very, they're not very evolved. They're like almost like would be an analog for like a leech or a mosquito in the physical world. These kind of astral beings, I will tell you, absolutely exist, and you can use this symbol to encourage them to let go and release. But that person has to be truly done with whatever it was that the thing was teaching them. And if they have some kind of emotional connection to whatever the trauma was, or whatever, where this thing found an opening to latch on, then a lot of times it won't release. You can't force these things unless the person you're working with is absolutely done with it. So then there's the daikomyo, which means storehouse of the it means, let's see, treasure house of the celestial being, and it's the one that looks probably the most like a pagoda, and it's very powerful. There's actually a sort of pocket dimension that exists for Reiki, to where I became aware of it, and then much later saw art representing this dimension. And it is a one of these Japanese style pagodas. It's on an island in a lake, and there's a bridge that leads to it that you have to go through a torii, which is those kind of gates that they have that look almost like a Japanese kanji that are left over from Shinto times. And it has an open roof, and blue-white light comes down from the celestial realms, and you can have someone lay upon the I mean, this all happens in astral space, but you can have someone lay upon like a, I don't know, like a healing couch or something like this, and you can work on them, and then the energy of Reiki is coming through even more strongly, the white-blue healing light. So that's the daikomyo. Then there's the Tibetan daikomyo, which is an interesting amalgamation of male and female symbol principles. And then there is a Tibetan fire serpent, and this is something that it seems to activate the 7 chakra centers. And am I forgetting one? Let's see. Chokurei, Hanshization, Chokurei, Seiheki, Hanshization, and Daikomyo, Tibetan Daikomyo, yeah, and the Tibetan fire serpent. So those are the 6 symbols. So you could certainly reverse 4 of the 6 rather easily, I would think. The 2 that you would probably have a hard time doing with, and also I'm not even sure what this would mean, would be the daikomyo and the Hansuje Shinen. The daikomyo is so sacred, it's so incredibly powerful and sacred, it's almost impossible to overstate like how beautiful and clean that symbol is. So whatever you would make would be, I imagine, some kind of beyond foul I don't know, like the cavern of the rotten stench or something like that, the storehouse of putrefaction or something.
So I know what it can be used for. So what is the opposite of, pleasure? What is the opposite of everything we find holy, right? Mm-hmm. The opposite of everything we find holy is hellfire, essentially. So if you reverse that high degree symbol, what you're gonna get is the lowest level of Patala, or the underworld, where actually there is that lake of fire. And that lake of fire exists in all religions. There is lake of fire in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Greek mythology it's Tartarus, in Persian mythology it is Arezura, or the hell realm. There is also different hell realms in different mythologies. There is always like small aspect of the underworld for the craziest lunatics ever, uh, in every culture. And they don't remain in it forever. They remain in it forever only in Christianity. That's the only true innovation that religion has regarding the hell realm, with the flames. So if we reverse that sacred symbol, what we would get is the gateway into the hellfire, probably. And that could be used to cast into the hellfire everything which is burdening the client.
That's interesting because, it's called the holy fire a lot of times, the Reiki itself. And I saved my father's life when he was very nearly died. And, I didn't have time to like sit there and do some kind of visualization. It's just the visualization happened automatically. What happened was my father had cancer years ago, and he was also on blood pressure medication to lower his blood pressure, and so his blood pressure was very low from taking this medication. And then he smoked a bunch of weed with me, and there was an interaction between the weed and the low blood pressure medication. And he was sitting there, and he was like, ugh. And then he went, and he projectile vomited. And I could suddenly see like his astral cord of like the connection of his soul being rooted in his body, and it was like splintering like a rope that was fraying. And I just, without thinking about it, I jumped up and I brought my hands together and I just clapped them on him like with force. And like as they were going through the air, I was just covered in a white fire with a blue edge on it. And I just clapped onto him, and I was like, no, this isn't his time. And I saw the cord then, like, instead of fraying, it like went back. But it does operate it as a blue and white holy fire that kind of does what you're saying, except for instead it says, well, let's take it up to the light and transmute it back into its original form. That's the way a right-hand path Reiki practitioner would look at that principle. So it's interesting the way that you're reversing it. It intuitively sounds correct.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know. Maybe we'll meet once, who knows, because
I would like that, Dimitri.
If I want to get the initiation and reverse the symbols, we're the only one I can make experiments.
Watch me be outcast from the Reiki community if it gets out. I don't think they're going to be watching your show. I'm kind of relying on that.
Yeah. So this is like the most insightful conversation, one of the most insightful interviews I had. But like, do you work with any spirits outside Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot. So interestingly enough, usually when I invoke them is when I do Reiki, and I mean, I have a vast assortment. So I'll say enlightened Reiki masters, angels and archangels. I say you'll laugh at my list, but that's okay. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. I invoke a couple of like enlightened masters, like Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj. I then will do white buffalo calf woman, blue dragon of the east. Let's see, green Tara, white Tara, Kuan Yin, earth goddess Gaia. I have a couple of astral guides that are specific to me. A white stag, a unicorn. I invoke unicorn, and unicorn is actually would probably be my very first guide. I just didn't recognize it when I was a kid. And then let's see, who else do I invoke with that? I mean, all the archangels, Raphael, Metatron, Michael, Gabriel. I feel like I'm forgetting some other. Oh yeah, so I also work with a entity or spirit that I call Elf Queen. She is this like I don't know how to describe her better than she's from the Fey realm, and she is a queen of the elves. And she was my original guides were the white stag, the elf queen, this little gnome earth elemental that identifies himself as Long Tom, and he looks just like a gnome, and he has a very long pipe, and his pipe is almost as tall as he is, but he's quite small. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to think conversion here, so maybe I guess it's double with centimeters almost. So he's maybe like 30 centimeters tall, something like that. He's quite small, maybe this big. What other spirit do I work with? I will sometimes work with elements. I definitely work with the sacred directions. I will do mantras to the planetary deities with the Vedic astrology. So, like, I will tell you the chant to pacify Mars. It goes, Dharani Garbha Sambotam Viditkante Samaprabham Kumaram Shakti Hastam Cha Mangalam Pranayam Mayaham. And that's to pacify Mars. And it basically says in English something like, "Oh, Mars, with your powerful shield and your bright, shiny spear, you are always and forever victorious. And I ask to appease you that you may assist me in works of like competition and being able to overcome my impulses of anger and wrath," something like this. I forget the exact translation, but it basically appeals to the Mangala or Aries or Mars, right? And so there's chants, there's Sanskrit chants for all the different planetary gods, and so I work with the planetary gods quite often. Even Saturn. Saturn obviously is I think is miscast as this like nasty energy in Vedic astrology, when I see it as like boundaries and discipline more than anything else. And there's nothing wrong with boundaries and discipline, and there's nothing wrong with death in its right place. And so, I think I'm probably a lot more open-minded towards all this stuff than most people are, because usually people want to bifurcate. Go ahead.
You told me you are invoking Allah, or did I misheard something?
No, I don't invoke Allah. No, that's not a I don't know, a deity name that I would invoke. What you thought I said that during the long list?
Yeah, I misheard something, but yeah. So can you tell us something about Vedic astrology, how it is different from the Western one?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, see, this is my wheelhouse where I feel super expert and can talk freely. The first thing that's majorly different about Vedic astrology from Western astrology is Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, or another way of putting it is the skies as they were somewhere between like 2,400 to 3,000 years ago, when so I believe that Western astrology is Vedic astrology. It's Vedic astrology that migrated through Zoroaster's Persia. And when it moved through Zoroaster's Persia, it removed the quality of cyclical nature of time in favor of that there's forever progress, this kind of underlying Western myth of there's ever something progressing towards something, and also added a dualistic quality and a free will quality to where it almost negated the idea of karma, in the sense of that Western astrologers often really downplay they just downplay the karmic aspect, and they're like, oh, this is just about your personality and this is all about your internal state. It's nothing to do with what's going to happen in the outer world. Or even if they acknowledge that it's something to do with the outer world, they just really want to put like too much of a free will aspect into it. Whereas in Vedic astrology, there's the concept of there's basically three kinds of karmas. There's karmas that are very flexible, and this is shown in the chart of that there's very few indications of a specific thing. And which means that, yeah, there's a slight chance that it's going to happen. If you start seeing 2 or 3 indications of something's going to happen, then it becomes very stable karma that's very unlikely to not play out in a specific way. And then there's a third level of karma, which is when you see 4, 5, 6 different indications of the exact same thing. And this is sort of God tier karma, that nothing short of miraculous occurrence to where the creator or a god interferes with the karma of that individual. And so when Vedic astrology went through Persia, it started to become Western astrology. And then the Arabs kind of did all kinds of research, absolutely brilliant, came up with all kinds of different techniques, like the Arab parts. Like the part of fortune is probably the most well-known of the Arabic parts that have been added. But they came up with all sorts of additional calculations, but almost all of them continued to rely upon that moment at which Vedic astrology went through Persia. And when it was taught to the Persians, they understood it to be that the sky was always a certain way. And that's why someone who, like myself, I'm an Aries in Western astrology, but Vedic astrology, because it takes into account the precession of the equinoxes, the way that the wobble of the earth moves, when you look up in the sky on the 31st of March and you see what sign, as you look up into the east and you look in the ecliptic, when you see what sign the sun rises in, you'll see that it's actually Pisces, because the precession of the equinoxes has shifted things so that the sun no longer rises in Aries on March 31st, which is my birthday. It now rises in the sign of Pisces. So somehow the Vedic astrologers knew about the precession of the equinoxes. My personal belief is that, I can't prove this, but I think Vedic astrology is Atlantean astrology that was reformatted for the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age of Kali Yuga, by some enlightened rishis in India. And so they account for that precession of the equinoxes. So there's about a 60% crossover. So about 60% of people, something like this, have the same sign, the same sun sign in both Western and Eastern. But about 40% of people are like myself, to where it's one sign earlier. So like I would be an Aries in Western, but in Vedic, I'm a Pisces sun. Right. So that's one of the differences. The other major two differences is the concept of yogas, or karmic yokes, which is certain planetary combinations. I'll give you a simple example. If you have Moon and Jupiter in the same house, they're in mutual, what are called kendras or angular houses from one another. And so you have something formed called a Gaja Kasari yoga, which means literally the elephant lion yoga. And so almost everyone will like you. You have a certain fierceness to you, but also you have like the wisdom of the elephant, and you tend to just have things go your way. And there's hundreds of these yogas. And these yogas are what really tell you about rarer karmas that are going to come through. And so an interesting one is, you might see someone who has like an amazing artistic talent, right? And they've been on YouTube for 10 years and they have this incredible voice and they speak really well. Well, they have a Lakshmi yoga maybe, so that way they have incredible artistic talent, but they don't have a Raja yoga, which is the fame yoga. And then you see talentless hacks like Katy Perry, who just has like nice tits and that's it, and they just soar into the heavens with tremendous fame in the music realm despite having no musical talent. So these yogas are what really determines certain kind of karmic bundles. And then the third element that Vedic astrology has, I mean, there's many differences, but the third major element is they have this concept of the Mahadashas. So it's a timing system that tells you when karmas are going to ripen. And when those karmas ripen is huge, because it does happen in some people's charts where they have like a Raja yoga that says fame, and it's like they're never going to have a cycle to where that's particularly strong. They're never going to, for example, like right now I'm in my Mars Mahadasha, and in my natal chart, Mars is 3rd and 8th Lord. So, I became a professional astrologer during my 8th Lord's time period, which makes perfect sense, right? Because 8th house rules astrology, among other things. So I became a professional astrologer and started to dive more into being a magician, a practical magician, all this. right around the time that I transitioned into my Mars Mahadasha. So all my karmas around like my various different esoteric and mystical talents really came to the fore during my Mars Mahadasha. And there's also subdashas, so they're lesser importance, but they also still activate these karmas. So that was a long-winded reply, but those are the three major distinct elements. There's many lesser things, but those are the really big differences between Western and Eastern. And I find it to be, Western's great for analyzing people's personality. It's quite useful for looking at relationships in particular, because one of the problems with Vedic astrology is they managed to keep it pure for thousands of years. And they're very rigid. They're a bit like the French, the way the French don't want to change the French language. So that, like, if they ever need to change the French language, they just borrow an English word. But they continue to speak French the same way they've been speaking it forever. Likewise, in Vedic astrology, they're very inflexible. Their belief is something to the effect of these incredible, miraculous rishis were such geniuses long ago, and they could figure this all out, but nobody has that level of consciousness anymore, and so it's disrespectful to the ancients to try and innovate it all. And that's one of the weaknesses, in my opinion, of Vedic astrology. Whereas the West has gotten so innovative, there's just a bunch of bullshit out there now. I'm not saying it's all bullshit. I'm saying there's a ton of amazing techniques that have been developed by especially the Arabs, and then to some degree later Western astrologers have come along and done great stuff. But really, for me, the most brilliance that has ever come out of Western astrology was during like the heyday of Baghdad and Iraq, and when the Arabic astrologers were really going nuts. Sometime between, I don't know, whenever Muhammad made Islam until basically when Islam started to go off the rails and say the 1400s, whatever. That was when a tremendous amount of incredible innovation was done in Western astrology that is really fantastic, and it works within its own system. I find that Vedic astrology is vastly better for determining what's going to happen in people's lives, though. You want to know if you're going to be rich? Vedic astrology. You want to know if you're going to be famous? Vedic astrology. You want to know if you're going to get married or how many kids you're going to have? Vedic astrology. You want to know if a relationship's going to work? You don't want Vedic astrology. Why? Well, because they say crazy shit like, if you have a certain combination that really activates your fourth house, it'll say, oh, this person rides an amazing elephant. Obviously, nobody's riding an elephant unless you're at a circus nowadays. What it would mean in modern times is this person has a really nice Tesla or a Ferrari Testarossa or a Lamborghini or whatever, because it's fourth house of vehicles. But in ancient India, that meant you rode around on a fucking elephant. So you have to translate from what the ancients are saying into like modern Western whatever's going on. And so you have to do that translation in your mind as a Western Vedic astrologer. But what they're not good about is relationships, because they think of things like, you're going to only be married once, and all they care about is it harmonious and will it last forever? They don't care if people are happy. They certainly don't care if people are having good sex, other than if they're having children. And so modern Westerners don't generally gravitate towards Vedic relationships. They tend to gravitate towards relationships that actually have a lot of disharmony, which is great for growth, but is terrible for stability. So if I want to evaluate a relationship in modern times, I pretty much just move right away from Vedic astrology and I go right to Western. But if I'm doing any other aspect of astrology, anything predictive, always Vedic, always. It's just not even close. I know both systems very well, and Vedic astrology is infinitely superior for timing of karmas and when things are going to happen. It's just not close.
So you are expert in astrology, I am not. But what I can say is that, like, I am born at November 6th, right? And I definitely feel like a Scorpio, but in Vedic astrology, I am Libra. So
are you?
I heard that somewhere. Am I Scorpio in Vedic astrology?
Well, let me look real quick, because you would probably be somewhat cuspy. I mean, you definitely present. I find that Western is more accurate for personality, though. So like I'm much more like an Aries. I don't understand how this principle works, but it does seem to be true that the Western got really, really good at how they got really good at how so you said November 6th, right? They got really good at how let's see, what would you be? So yeah, you would be a Libra according to that, but I see it as for personality, I find still that Western is better for personality because I don't find myself to be a Pisces, like in terms of my personality. But when I look at my sun being in Pisces in my seventh house, conjunct my first and my sun being my 12th lord, conjunct my first and 10th lord of my body and also career in the seventh house of Pisces, and I look at it purely not about my personality, but I look at it in terms of how my karma's ripened, Vedic astrology is correct. I don't identify with being a Pisces with Virgo rising fucking at all. Like it doesn't seem to match at all. I don't understand how that works. It's something that's puzzled me my entire astrology career. It does seem like somehow both systems work within their own system. But again, if I want to know someone's personality, I will actually go to Western if I want to learn about their personality. If I want to learn how their life is going to go, I will look towards Vedic. And that might sound insane that they could both work. And I couldn't tell you why this is. I just know it's true that, like, I'm very initiating. I'm quite aggressive. I always want to try new things, and then I get bored of them quickly. All the classic Aries traits, like that's me. Like I was in tons of fights when I was younger. I've had guns pulled on me. Aries are the most shot sign of any sign in the zodiac. Aries get shot the most because we stay stupid shit. And so I don't understand how that works, but I find that for personality, Western astrology is fucking incredible. But whether the person's going to get a job or whether they're going to be famous or wealthy or whatever, it's Vedic. I mean, you definitely radiate scorpionic energy, you know, like you're very Plutonian, absolutely, journeying through the underworld to gain wisdom. I mean, of course you're a Scorpio.
Yeah, so like I don't know. I petitioned my neighbor who is into yoga and shit to design Vedic astrology chart, but he's like late, so maybe I will pay you or teach you some shit or something.
Yeah,
So
we
yeah,
can work out a bargain. I know you like those.
so yeah. So I need to tell you something.
Yes.
Guess which type of entity saved me when that guy cursed me? A local fairy queen. So the local fairy chief, like she is the ruler of all of the fairies in the entire Balkan Peninsula, like
Wow.
the infinite forest mother. So I work with her a lot. And technically, according to that Wallachian tradition, the fairies serve the forest mother and the lord of the rivers. And the lord of the rivers and the fairies reply to the sons of the dragon. And the great dragon is actually the source of everything. So it's actually a draco. So fairies, according to the Slavic Wallachian magic, are part of the draconian pantheon. At the top of the pantheon is actually the great dragon, Zmeo.
That makes sense.
It's not one being. It's like a enormous manifestation of primordial consciousness.
Yes.
It's not one spirit. Regarding the Fae, their current is blue flame. They are like, when you summon them, they are either white and radiant or they burn with blue fire. So yeah, that's something. Can you tell me with your experiences with the Fae, since you are like a shaman and shit?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I have always when I was a kid I was shocked to find out that fairies weren't real because I had this classic book that a lot of hippie households had when I was a kid that's just called The Fairies or something like that. And this guy later admitted that, you know, he was basically shamanic and that he wasn't just introducing Celtic and European lore, he was talking about his direct experience. And everything he wrote about all these Celtic myths and all this kind of stuff, I knew intuitively that it was true. And I was shocked and super angry when I found out everyone said they're not, they're not real. And I was like, but I know they're real. And so when I was in first or second grade, which is so that I was 8 or 9 years old, something like this, I was down in this local wildlife preserve that is a wetlands. And I was walking by myself and I heard this whirring noise, and it sounded like, much like a dragonfly or something flying, but like much more powerful than that, something bigger, like a what we call a bumblebee. It sounded almost like a bee. And just flying by, and it created a breeze, was this bright red orb, and it had wings, and it turned its head just for a minute, and it was just like the classic, like, for me, the way I experienced it at the time was it was a female's face, but it looked also quite alien, and it looked just very much like this pixie thing, and it went flying past me as I was a kid, and my friend was with me, and I was like, holy shit, did you see that? And he was like, what are you talking about? He didn't see it, this thing, but I heard it, I felt it, and I saw it. And I was like, I think that was a fairy. And he laughed at me, and he was like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. And I was like, I saw it clear as day. And so for years after that, I wondered about that experience. And then when I went up to the Olympic National Peninsula, or the Olympic National Park, which is on the Olympic Peninsula up in Washington State, there's a forest there that's been there since the end of the last ice age. So it's an ultra primeval forest. I mean, it's, 12, 13,000 years old, something like this. And it's never been cut. It's the only uncut temperate rainforest in the lower 48 United States. You have to go up to Canada or Alaska to get it. And there it's palpable, the Fey energy. And so I've been up there a number of times and taken psychedelics, and I've seen fairies, I've seen gnomes. I've heard a court of elves singing like in a foreign language, to where I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. But I saw a number of, I usually experience the Fey realms as seeing orbs. They look, much like orbs, but if I focus in on it, it then coalesces into some kind of shape. And I think that the entire class of Fey, which I agree includes dragons. It also, for me, includes unicorns. It's a lot of mythological creatures that seem to fall under this class of nature spirit, that they appear initially as orbs, but then if you concentrate on them, they then coalesce into some kind of archetypal shape, like the classic pixies, little winged pixies, or a unicorn, or a dragon, or a gnome, whatever. I haven't been fortunate enough, or maybe I have been fortunate that I haven't seen a dragon. That hasn't been a thing. I have a feeling that those are like even further in vibration away from us, from some of these lesser nature spirits, so they're more difficult to interact with. But almost 100% of all my experiences with Fae that haven't been where I'm invoking them to do magic, or I'm doing it, have happened in one or two places, either on the British Isles when I was in sacred sites where they were reasonably still wild, or almost all of them happened up in the Olympic National Rainforest, where it's this ancient primeval forest. And like I say, it's palpable there. I mean, it looks like, if you look up pictures of it online, you'll see, oh yeah, you can practically see the fairies in the pictures. So other than when I invoke them for healing, and they'll sometimes speak to me, like Long Tom and Elf Queen, almost all of them have happened up in that, except for this one that happened here not too far away in Portland, although that place is despoiled nowadays. This was 40 years ago or something. They've happened in sacred sites in England, and it was more, I could hear them, I couldn't see them. They seem like they were much more shy there, but they're like active in the Olympics, and they even have a certain initial sense of hostility, because all around the Olympics it's been logged repeatedly, and so they're quite disliking of humans because of how despoiled the forests around there are. They liked me okay, but they weren't initially friendly at all, that's for sure.
So technically, I gotta share my perspective on the Fae. We agree on one thing, and that one thing is that Fae are morally ambivalent. They
Yes,
are not good or evil, they simply do their job, they guard nature, and make it to function properly. Now, when I work with the Fae, I always see them like not like a pixies, that's more like
Mhm.
a modern fairy tale approach to them. I see them like if you ever saw those old medieval depictions of fairies, like a woman with long hair and white dresses, but not in the same sense that Morana has a white dress. There is completely different vibe to it.
Yeah.
And they manifest to me as a figures made of blue flame,
Mm.
figures made of blue fire. And what I noticed about them is that they are really good for healing and they benefit my physical body more than any other type of spirits. However, they are pretty weird and difficult to understand.
I agree
Uh,
completely on that.
Now, I talked to one practitioner. I don't talk anymore because I have a really difficult personality, so I lose my temper a lot. It drives a lot of people out. So I noticed that they have like those circles of blue astral stones, which work like gateways, and they are like portals into their realm. Do you know anything about it?
That's interesting because of course, I mean, there's all the Celtic lore on that. I I intuitively and feel like from past lives I know exactly what you're talking about, and they seem to mirror like the old monolithic structures in your mind, but smaller
Yeah.
in
Yes.
stature.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like those circles of small astral blue stones, which
yes,
serve like portals. I saw those on multiple occasions, and I performed pathworking in which I was commanded by the Forest Mother as a boon, as a devotional
Mhm.
act, to open portals via distance, like distant opening of portals. So you have a location on the map and you have to focus in 8 places. And I did it, and then it kind of created portals on those areas. But I really, so she was talking about like you take 8 physical stones, right?
Mhm.
9 or 13,
Mhm.
8, 9, or 13 physical stones, and
Mhm.
then you inscribe them astrally with certain symbols.
Hmm.
Then you summon the Fae, and then you open the gate. I never did it physically. I simply opened portals via distance, like just astral
Yeah.
codes with connected to the certain energy realms. But I only had opportunity to discuss those circles with that one practitioner with whom I broke ties due to my difficult personality. And I need to warn you, if you want to continue talking to me, I am changing, I am improving a lot. But I have a really difficult personality. And if I lash out
Uh-huh.
or do some nonsense, it's not a reflection of my internal character. It's just me being me. I lose control sometimes.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, regarding the Fae, what I also noticed is that they are not willing to take life worth of humans.
Mm.
Uh, they do it more rarely. And when you give them offerings, they prefer for you to give them in streams because fairies are connected to the element of water heavily. So can you do you do any rituals with the Fae? Can you elaborate on that?
Do I do any what of the Fae?
Rituals and
Rituals?
yeah.
Uh, you know, I have had a lot of past lives on the British Isles, and I know that I have made mistakes with the Fae. And one of the great fears that my soul has is getting trapped in the Fae realm, um, like tumbling in. And what you're talking about is definitely something that resonates with me, and I can hear the truth in it. and I'm certain that that'll work. But the Fae are rather notorious, as you said, for they don't make any sense. Like their way of viewing things is completely alien to us, and it's astonishing how easy it is to offend them. And if you offend them enough, they will take retribution on you. And what they can do is essentially pull your mind into the Fey realm, and that can have like egregious impacts on your health and on your sanity, really. And that this is where all these stories of, oh, you know, someone fell in and was asleep for 100 years, that I don't think is literally true. I think it's that you lose your mind for some period of time, that you are completely deranged by interacting with these beings. So I haven't actively summoned them. I've started to a couple of times, and I've always felt nervous about it, but it was something that I was thinking of doing this exact summer, the next time I go up to the Olympics, because you can do what you're talking about. You know, you can do anything astrally and remotely, but there is a difference in power level whenever you go to like a sacred site or a natural site such as this. And so I haven't actually done that, but that's something that I've been wanting to do up in specifically up in the Olympics, because it's so close there. The veil between this realm and the Fey realm is very thin there. Even you know, Muggles kind of sense them there.
So there are two ways of appeasing the Fae to a ridiculous degree. You know that what I do isn't liked by many of the Fae. Work with the Jinn, for example, heavy work with the chiefs of the underworld. That's not something Faes appreciate necessarily. They are a really specific race of elementals. Now there is a way of appeasing them. There are two ways. There is right-handed way, and then there is a left-handed way. The right way is technically you call them up and you tell them, hey guys, we as humans pollute nature, and that pollution of nature has a direct effect on the energy roads Fae use. So I come here as a human and I will offer my life force to fix some of the roads in your area. And then they will literally come in really large numbers and take small amount of your life force, relatively small comparing to what you possess, and they will use it to fix some of their pathways. That's a right-handed way. Well, the left-handed way is you call them up and you say, there are certain spirits and certain men which thrive on your destruction. Give me like their faces, give me their names, give me their seals. I will curse them, and they will die, and they will die as an offering to the protection of your boundaries. So when you do this painful act, one piece of energy goes to the protection of the boundary, and another piece of energy goes to you. So if you do one of those operations few times, they will then bother to explain to you how they think. So the Fae are pretty. So imagine if horse had intelligence of like 300 IQ, right? So that's how Fae operate. That's how Fae think. They are extremely intelligent and knowledgeable, but their task and way of operation is much simpler than we think. To the Fae, they have one task: to protect nature, and nothing is about that task. And to them, everything is about boundaries. So Fae have those weird astral stones which mark their boundaries. And when you step over it, you bring the energy into the realm which shouldn't be there. And they immediately attack. They do not care why you came. They care about you fucking up with their boundaries. And because they are all about boundaries, they're gonna fuck you over. They do not care why you fuck them up. It's like when a hungry stranger comes to your house to eat. It's a hungry stranger wanting to eat, but he fucked up your house and you don't care it's a fucking hungry stranger. You're gonna kick his ass. So then it's all about territory. And if you want to work with them, what you need to do is you like summon them and you'll tell them, hey guys, this Fae clan rules this territory. And how you work with the Fae is you technically work with the Fae of the area you are originating from, or with the Fae of the area who are local to you. So the reason why it is pointless to make some Fae pantheon is because it doesn't exist. Every Fae in some local area have its own like local chief or local guy. There is no mother of all fairies. There was a mother of all fairies, but she was killed long ago. She died long ago. Fairies are mortal. They also kind of die. So simply go to your area, give offerings, and say, I acknowledge your boundaries. I acknowledge your all of the rules you have. I am offering the piece of my life force, my personal life force, to help you fix those boundaries. They're gonna come, they're gonna take the life force. And then what will happen is when you do it, they will ask you for a gift. They will ask you, like, hey, you'll help us fix the boundaries. What you want? What you want? And then what you're gonna ask of them is you're gonna ask of them, I'm gonna meet your elder, I'm gonna meet your chief. They actually don't have queens. That's our understanding of it. They do
Right.
not have kingdoms either. They live like a pack of animals. You always have like the elder female. So they have like elders. They do not have kings. Some other types of entities are more sophisticated, but elves in reality don't have kings. So the chief of that area will come to you. And then what you should ask of them is to technically teach you the secrets of the blue flames. So in the same way that we as humans originate all from the same source, all of the fairies originate from the blue flame.
Mm.
This is like their primordial place of origin. So when you tell them to teach you the secrets of the blue flames, they will kind of come to you and they'll kind of tell you, do you really want to do this? And when you say yes, they will start teaching you an actual shit. But for everything they teach you, you need to either kill those who weaken their boundaries or to infuse your own life force into the boundaries. That's how they will help you, because then you are helping them in their metaphysical task. And that's the only way to work with them. I helped them a few times, and I also offended them a few times. And the only reason why I am alive is because I helped them for every of my transgressions twice. So, yeah.
Interesting. Wow, that's very useful, and I will keep that in mind later this summer.
Yeah. But like, what you need to be careful about is, yes, when you summon them, you told me that you always kind of feel overwhelmed and kind of are afraid of going to be dissolved, like your consciousness breaking apart. There is that risk always, because when you summon the Fae, they are different. So when you summon darker spirits, they come to break the veil, right? So break the veil between the worlds. The Fae don't exactly do it. The Fae don't break the veil necessarily. What they do is they attune you to their veil so you can see them as the veil doesn't exist. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, at the process of you attuning to that veil, there is a severe trauma going on. And what you need to do is you need to infuse yourself into the veil first, and then once it happens, your trauma will be much weaker when you summon them. There will be no that my mind gonna explode feeling, because you will be present in that veil, and that veil will be part of you, and it will allow them to freely cross into you and cross through you into the world. You will kind of become partially a fae. So, according to the old stories, you have the fae, who are the female, and they are always married to like gnomes or something. So, elf originally in the lore wasn't a male fae. The elf is a man who works with the fae and has part of the fae flame within him. So that's the elf. So technically, when you infuse yourself in their barrier, you become the elf.
Mm.
And the reason why you see always fairies and some form of a small dwarfish distorted creature together is because those small dwarfish creatures are male counterparts of the fae. According to the Slavic lore, the fae are married to the Vodanoi, and the Vodanoi are essentially just like you described, small, deformed dwarfish creatures, which are male. So
Interesting. I wonder if that's a couple then I've been working with this whole time. I didn't realize that.
there is a strong possibility that they are indeed a couple.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Well, so I am probably needing to end here, but I would love to come on again and discuss the mysteries with you, and perhaps yet a more epic battle of left-hand path versus right-hand path.
Yeah.
But
I
this has
need
been
to go from
exceptional.
this podcast too, but yeah, send me this via Google Drive. This will
I
be like
will.
a file.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop on the record now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Go, brother. Goodbye. It was a pleasure to have you here in
And
those 2 parts. Thank you.
it
Yeah.
was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was well
Thank you.
received.
You
Thank you,
too.
brothers. See you soon. Bye.
Yeah.